March 15, 1944 opened quietly over the English countryside, the kind of deceptive calm that always seemed to precede violence. From 15,000 feet, the patchwork of farms and hedgerows looked peaceful, almost unreal, as Captain Francis "Gabby" Gabreski settled his P-47 Thunderbolt into formation. The air was thin, cold, and smooth, perfect flying weather, but Gabreski's attention was fixed on the steady vibration coming through the control stick. That vibration was familiar. It was the sound of power, 18 cylinders firing in perfect rhythm, driving the biggest fighter engine ever mounted in a single-engine aircraft. For 8 months, Gabreski had trusted that sound with his life. The Thunderbolt was not elegant. It was massive, brutal, and unapologetically American. Where other fighters looked sharp and delicate, the Jug looked like a flying engine with wings attached. And yet it had brought Gabreski victory after victory against some of the Luftwaffe's best pilots. Today, though, this aircraft was different. Fresh from the Republic Aviation Factory, it carried a modification that ground crews spoke about in hushed, almost reverent tones. Anti-detonation injection. Water injection. The miracle system. Engineers claimed it could turn the Thunderbolt from a powerful but heavy escort fighter into something entirely new. An aircraft that could finally match German interceptors at altitude. More power, they said. Emergency power. The difference between watching German fighters slip away and running them down. Ahead, the radio crackled. Radar stations along the coast were vectoring the formation toward enemy aircraft climbing out of France. Messerschmitt Bf-109s. Light, agile, deadly at altitude. Normally, this was where the Germans held every advantage. Gabreski glanced at his instruments. The manifold pressure needle sat at 52 inches of mercury. Normal cruise. Safe power. The engine temperature was steady. Everything was exactly where it should be. He reached for the small switch beside the throttle quadrant. The switch connected to a pressurized tank behind his seat, filled with 15 gallons of distilled water mixed with isopropyl alcohol. The theory was elegant. Inject the mixture into the supercharger intake at high power settings, cool the combustion process, prevent detonation, and unlock horsepower that had always existed, but had never been usable. 2,000 horsepower would become 2,500. At least, that was the promise. Gabreski shoved the throttle forward and flipped the switch. Instead of a surge of power, the Thunderbolt shuddered. The engine coughed, once, then again, like a man gasping for air. The steady vibration through the airframe fractured into something uneven and unsettling. The manifold pressure needle wavered, hesitated, then began to fall instead of rise. Engine temperatures climbed rapidly, edging past safe limits. Through the cockpit floor, Gabreski felt irregular pulses that told him something deep inside the engine was no longer firing in sequence. The turbocharger's familiar whine, normally smooth and confident, degraded into a strained, rasping sound that set every instinct screaming danger. Below him, German fighters peeled away and dove for safety. Not because they were afraid. Because they knew the Americans could no longer catch them. Across the formation, Gabreski saw the same confusion unfolding. Lieutenant Bob Johnson, one of the most aggressive pilots in the group, was backing off his throttle and pointing urgently at his instrument panel. Other P-47s began drifting out of position, pilots fighting engines that were supposed to be giving them the edge of their lives. The Messerschmitts sensed it instantly. Their Daimler-Benz engines, producing less power on paper, now held a crushing advantage. The Germans pressed their attack with confidence, slashing through the formation, forcing the Americans onto the defensive. The engagement lasted 12 minutes. When it was over, not a single German fighter had been lost. 3 Thunderbolts limped home on partial power, their pilots nursing engines that coughed and missed like wounded animals. Gabreski coaxed his crippled fighter back to RAF Steeple Morden, holding reduced throttle settings and listening to the uneven rhythm of cylinders that were no longer working together. When the engine finally shut down on the hardstand, the silence felt heavy. Master Sergeant Mike Quirk had been maintaining radial engines since before Pearl Harbor. When he pulled the cowling panels from Gabreski's aircraft, he didn't need long to understand what he was seeing. Cylinder number 14 told the whole story. Severe detonation damage. Spark plug electrodes eroded away. Heat stress fractures spider-webbing through the cylinder head. Black residue coating surfaces that should have been clean. This wasn't random failure. This was systematic destruction. Within hours, identical reports flooded in from fighter bases across England. At Debden, at Boxted, at Leiston. Brand new P-47s, all fitted with the same water injection system, all suffering the same internal violence the moment emergency power was engaged. By nightfall, nearly 200 of the 8th Air Force's most advanced fighters were grounded. The Miracle system was officially declared unsafe. At Wright-Patterson Army Airfield, the response was swift and decisive. Senior engineers, combustion experts, and procurement officers gathered around polished tables and spoke with absolute confidence. The R-2800 double wasp, they said, was already operating at the edge of what physics allowed. Air-cooled aluminum and steel could only endure so much heat, so much pressure. Detonation was not a design flaw, it was a law of nature. You could not push an air-cooled engine beyond its rated limits without catastrophic failure. The destroyed cylinders from England proved it. The verdict was unanimous. Suspend the program. Return the engine to 2,000 horsepower. Accept the performance disadvantage. Reliability mattered more than ambition. The meeting adjourned. Everyone left satisfied. Everyone except Frank Walker. Walker was young. Too young, many thought, to be questioning principles that had governed engine design for decades. But his laboratory data refused to align with what the experts claimed was inevitable. The approved alcohol mixture, the one everyone trusted, did not suppress detonation under extreme conditions. It promoted it. And methanol behaved differently. So did water. Water didn't burn. It absorbed heat. It slowed combustion. In theory, its octane rating was infinite. Walker's calculations suggested that, under the savage pressures inside a combat-loaded engine, molecular behavior mattered more than tradition. The establishment called it suicide. Walker called it chemistry. Back in England, Bill Closs arrived carrying nothing but Walker's numbers and a willingness to ignore orders. He met Quirk beside Gabreski's wounded Thunderbolt and studied the engine like a detective examining a crime scene. Melted pistons. Warped valves. Burned electrodes. Everything pointed to uncontrolled explosion, not controlled combustion. Quietly, carefully, they prepared one aircraft for an unauthorized experiment. They drained the approved isopropyl alcohol. They replaced it with methanol and distilled water. 50-50. No paperwork. No permission. No safety net. Gabreski volunteered without hesitation. The ground run changed everything. The engine accelerated smoothly through power ranges that had previously caused violent shaking. Manifold pressure climbed past 52 inches. Then 60. Then 65. Cylinder head temperatures didn't spike, they dropped. The turbocharger sang instead of screamed. When Gabreski pushed to full emergency power, the Thunderbolt surged forward with a force that bordered on savage. The engine was producing nearly 2,800 horsepower, 800 more than its official rating. It should have destroyed itself. It didn't. In the air, the transformation was undeniable. Climb rate increased by 1,000 feet per minute. Time to altitude dropped dramatically. Top speed jumped beyond anything printed in the manuals. The jug was no longer heavy. It was unstoppable. On April 8th, the gamble went to war. When German fighters attacked the bomber stream, American pilots reached for a switch that had nearly killed them weeks earlier. This time, the response was instantaneous and violent. Thunderbolts accelerated like rockets. They climbed through German formations that had always held the advantage. The sky changed. 11 German fighters fell in 18 minutes. None of the Americans were lost. Combat reports reached Luftwaffe headquarters describing P-47s that climbed faster than Focke-Wulfs and outran Messerschmitts. At first, they were dismissed as exaggeration. Then the reports kept coming. Within days, every American fighter squadron in England had adopted Walker's mixture, quietly, unofficially, irresistibly. Losses plummeted. Mission aborts vanished. German casualties soared. Air superiority followed. By the time German engineers fielded their own methanol water systems, the balance had already shifted. American fighters dominated the skies not because the laws of physics had been broken, but because someone had finally understood them well enough to push right up against their true limits. Frank Walker returned to his laboratory, his work now validated by combat. His chemistry didn't just save pilots, it reshaped the future of propulsion, leading toward turbines, rockets, and the engines that would one day leave the atmosphere entirely. The irony was brutal. German engineers had known the theory for years, but they never dared to try it. The laws of physics were never defied. They were revealed by a junior engineer who refused to accept that impossible was the same thing as untrue.